In 1911, the Supreme Court ruled that Standard Oil must be broken apart. Smoke rose over refineries. Trains rolled heavy with crude. Headlines thundered across the nation. John D. Rockefeller watched from his window as the
May 15, 1911, Kykuit Estate, Pocantico Hills, New York. The telegram arrived at 10:47 a.m. John D. Rockefeller was on the golf course. Ninth hole. Perfect spring morning. Temperature 68 degrees. His caddy brought the message to him between shots. Rockefeller read it once, folded it, put it in his pocket. "Come on, gentlemen," he said to his golfing partners. "Let's get on with it." His voice was calm. His hands were steady. He lined up his next shot. Swung. The ball sailed straight down the fairway. The telegram was from his lawyers. The Supreme Court had just destroyed his empire. Standard Oil Company of New Jersey must be dissolved, broken into 34 separate companies. The monopoly was over. The greatest business empire in American history was being dismantled by court order. Rockefeller was 72 years old. He'd built Standard Oil from nothing, controlled 90% of America's oil for decades, made himself the richest man in the world. Now the government was taking it all away. He finished his round of golf. Shot 91. Not his best, but respectable. What nobody knew, not his lawyers, not the government, not the journalists celebrating his downfall, was that May 15, 1911, would make John D. Rockefeller richer than he'd ever been. The thing that was supposed to destroy him would multiply his fortune 5 times over. The irony was complete. The thing that was supposed to save America from monopoly guaranteed Rockefeller's immortality. The Supreme Court ordered Standard Oil broken into 34 separate companies. Those who held stock in the companies were given a percent of stock in each of the companies equal to their hold in Standard Oil. Rockefeller's pre-ruling holdings in Standard Oil was approximately 25% of the company. Rockefeller received 25% of the stock in each of the 33 companies, which saw his wealth increase from $300 million to $900 million shortly after the ruling. They tried to break him. He multiplied. The 34 companies that emerged from the breakup became the modern oil giants. Standard Oil of New Jersey, renamed Exxon, now part of Exxon Mobil. Standard Oil of New York, renamed Mobil, now part of Exxon Mobil. Standard Oil of Indiana, renamed Amoco, American Oil Company, now part of BP. Continental Oil Company, now part of ConocoPhillips. Standard Oil of Ohio, acquired by BP in 1987. The government thought it was ending his monopoly. It was creating an oil dynasty that would dominate the 20th century and beyond. The irony was complete. The breakup that was supposed to limit his power made him the richest human who had ever lived. To understand how this happened, we need to go back 41 years. Cleveland, Ohio. John D. Rockefeller was 31 years old. He'd already been in the oil business for 7 years. He'd started with a single refinery in 1863, borrowed $1,000 from his father, at 10% interest, because his father was a con man who charged his own son interest. Used that money to build a refinery with partners Maurice Clark and Samuel Andrews. By 1870, Rockefeller and his partners were operating the largest refineries in Cleveland. But that wasn't enough. Cleveland had dozens of refineries. Pennsylvania had hundreds. The oil industry was chaos. Price wars. Overproduction. Bankruptcies. Refineries opening and closing every month. Rockefeller saw opportunity in the chaos. On January 10, 1870, he incorporated Standard Oil Company of Ohio. Initial capital, $1 million. Rockefeller's share, 2,667 of the 10,000 shares. 26.67% ownership. That percentage would never change. For 41 years, through every merger, every acquisition, every reorganization, Rockefeller maintained approximately 25% ownership of Standard Oil. That percentage would make him the richest man in history. The numbers in 1870. Standard Oil refined 4% of America's oil. There were approximately 250 oil refineries in the United States. Kerosene sold for 58 cents per gallon. Most Americans couldn't afford it. Only the wealthy used kerosene lamps. The rest went to bed when the sun set. Rockefeller's goal was simple: control the oil industry. All of it. Refining, transportation, sales, everything. The method was ruthless. 1870 to 1882. The Cleveland Massacre and the Birth of the Trust. February 1872. Cleveland. Rockefeller launched what would later be called the Cleveland Massacre. He went to every refinery owner in Cleveland, one by one, made them an offer: sell to Standard Oil or be crushed. The terms were brutal. He'd pay a fair price if they sold immediately. If they refused, he'd use his control of railroad shipping to drive them out of business. He'd undersell them until they went bankrupt. Then he'd buy their equipment for pennies on the dollar. Most sold. Within 3 months, Rockefeller acquired 22 of Cleveland's 26 refineries. By the end of 1872, Standard Oil controlled 80% of Cleveland's oil refining. But Cleveland was just the beginning. 1873, Standard Oil expanded to Pittsburgh. Used the same tactics. Buy or be destroyed. 1874, Philadelphia. Same strategy. 1875, New York. Baltimore. The pattern repeated. By 1878, Standard Oil controlled 90% of America's oil refining capacity. The math was simple. Kerosene prices dropped from 58 cents per gallon in 1865 to 26 cents in 1870 to 8 cents by 1885. Rockefeller made oil affordable for ordinary Americans. Millions of people could now afford to light their homes at night. 1 cent per hour for light. Working and reading after dark became possible for the working class. But the methods were monopolistic. Rockefeller made secret deals with railroads. Got rebates on shipping costs that his competitors couldn't get. Sometimes got rebates on his competitors' shipments. The railroads paid Standard Oil for every barrel a competitor shipped. This gave Standard Oil pricing information and money from its own competition. January 2, 1882. The Standard Oil Trust was born. A group of 41 investors signed the Standard Oil Trust Agreement, which pooled their securities of 40 companies into a single holding agency managed by 9 trustees. The original trust was valued at $70 million. This was the first modern trust. A legal structure that allowed Standard Oil to coordinate operations across state lines while technically remaining separate companies. Rockefeller and 8 trustees controlled 40 companies. They operated as one entity but avoided state corporate laws by remaining legally separate. It was brilliant. And legal. At least for a while. By 1890, Standard Oil controlled 88% of refined oil flows in the United States. The numbers: 33,000 oil wells, 20,000 oil tank cars, 5,000 tank wagons delivering oil to homes and businesses, 100,000 employees. Annual revenue: $55 million. Rockefeller's personal fortune: approximately $150 million. Equivalent to $5 billion today. But that comparison understates it. In 1890, Rockefeller controlled approximately 1.5% of America's entire GDP. July 2, 1890. The Sherman Antitrust Act. Congress had been watching. So had state governments. So had the American public. The problem was clear. Trusts were concentrating too much economic power in too few hands. Standard Oil in petroleum. American tobacco in cigarettes. American sugar in sugar refining. Carnegie Steel in steel production. A handful of men controlled entire industries. July 2, 1890. President Benjamin Harrison signed the Sherman Antitrust Act into law. The law was simple. Every contract, combination in the form of trust or otherwise, or conspiracy, in restraint of trade or commerce among the several states, or with foreign nations, is declared to be illegal. It was designed to stop Standard Oil. Everyone knew it. The debates in Congress explicitly mentioned Rockefeller's monopoly. But the law had a problem. Nobody knew how to interpret it. What exactly was restraint of trade? Did the law ban all monopolies? Or just ones that acted unreasonably? Did efficiency count? If a company became dominant by being better than competitors, was that illegal? The courts struggled with these questions for 20 years. Meanwhile, Standard Oil kept growing. March 21, 1892. The Ohio Supreme Court dissolved the Standard Oil Trust, ordered the companies to operate independently. Rockefeller reorganized, moved operations to New Jersey. In 1899, he created Standard Oil Company, New Jersey, as a holding company. All assets and interests formerly grouped in the trust were transferred to the New Jersey Company. Same control, different legal structure. By 1904, Standard Oil controlled 91% of oil refinement and 85% of final sales in the United States. The monopoly was stronger than ever. November 18, 1906. The government strikes. Theodore Roosevelt was president. He'd made his reputation as a trust buster. He'd already broken up the Northern Securities Company railroad monopoly in 1904. Now he wanted Standard Oil. November 18, 1906. The U.S. Department of Justice filed suit against Standard Oil Company of New Jersey and 70 affiliated companies. The charges: conspiracy to restrain trade in violation of the Sherman Antitrust Act, monopolizing the petroleum industry through illegal means. The case was filed in Federal Circuit Court in St. Louis, Missouri. Judge Walter Henry Sanborn presiding. The case lasted over 2 years, called 444 witnesses, and produced a 14,500-page report. The evidence was overwhelming. Standard Oil had made secret deals with railroads to get illegal rebates, received rebates on competitors' shipments, used predatory pricing to drive competitors out of business, bought competitors under coercion, controlled pipeline networks to prevent competitors from transporting oil, fixed prices through coordination among supposedly independent companies, bribed legislators and government officials. The testimony was damning. Witness after witness described Standard Oil's methods. Small refinery owners forced to sell. Railroad executives admitting to special deals. Internal Standard Oil documents showing coordination between supposedly independent companies. Rockefeller himself was called to testify. He was 69 years old, white-haired, thin. He developed alopecia from stress in the 1890s and was completely bald, without eyebrows or body hair. He wore a wig in public. On the witness stand, he was maddeningly vague. Asked about specific business decisions, he repeated the same phrase, "I don't remember." Asked about secret railroad deals, "I don't recall." Asked about destroying competitors, "I can't remember those details." It was strategy. Rockefeller had retired from active management of Standard Oil in 1897. He claimed he knew nothing about current operations. The testimony made him look senile or dishonest, but it avoided incriminating himself. November 20, 1909, Judge Sanborn issued his ruling. Judge Walter Henry Sanborn ruled that indeed Standard Oil acted inappropriately to restrict interstate commerce. Standard Oil was guilty of violating the Sherman Antitrust Act. The remedy: dissolution. The trust must be broken up into independent companies. Standard Oil appealed to the U.S. Supreme Court. May 15, 1911. The Supreme Court decision. The Supreme Court heard arguments in March 1910. The case was so complex they ordered re-arguments in January 1911. 9 justices. Chief Justice Edward Douglas White presiding. The central question: what did the Sherman Act prohibit? All monopolies? Or only unreasonable monopolies? May 15, 1911. Washington, D.C. The Supreme Court issued its decision. 9-0. Unanimous. Standard Oil had violated the Sherman Antitrust Act. But the reasoning was new. Chief Justice Edward D. White delivered the court's opinion. When upholding a lower court's decree to break up the Standard Oil Company, the Supreme Court concluded that the Sherman Antitrust Act, 1890, forbade only unreasonable combinations or agreements in restraint of trade. This was the rule of reason. Not all monopolies were illegal. Only ones that unreasonably restrained trade. only ones that used illegal methods to gain or maintain monopoly power. Standard Oil qualified. The court found secret railroad rebates, unreasonable. Predatory pricing to destroy competitors, unreasonable. Forced acquisitions, unreasonable. Controlling 90% of oil refining through illegal means, unreasonable. The remedy: Standard Oil Company of New Jersey must divest itself of its holdings. It ordered Standard to break up into 39 independent companies with different boards of directors, the biggest two of the companies being Standard Oil of New Jersey, which became Exxon, and Standard Oil of New York, which became Mobil. The breakup was ordered to take effect within 6 months. By November 1911, Standard Oil would cease to exist as a unified entity. The government had won. The trustbusters had defeated the greatest monopoly in American history. Public opinion celebrated. Newspapers proclaimed the victory of the common man over concentrated wealth. Nobody realized what they'd actually done. The math was simple and devastating. Here's what the breakup meant for John D. Rockefeller. Before May 15, 1911, Rockefeller owned 25% of Standard Oil Company of New Jersey. Standard Oil was valued at approximately $600 million. Rockefeller's stake, $150 million. His total fortune, approximately $300 million. After May 15, 1911, Standard Oil was split into 34 companies. Rockefeller received 25% of each company. Each company was now traded independently on stock exchanges. Each company's value was based on its own operations, not the trust as a whole. The stock market reacted immediately and unexpectedly. The 34 companies were suddenly independent. Each had its own management, its own strategy, its own listing on the New York Stock Exchange. Investors could buy shares in specific regional oil companies instead of the monolithic trust. In the months following their listing on the stock exchange in 1911, the prices of the oil companies rose from 65% to 125%. Why? Several reasons. First, the companies were undervalued as part of the trust. As independent entities, investors could see their true worth. Standard Oil of New Jersey, later Exxon, was enormously profitable on its own. So was Standard Oil of New York, later Mobil. So was Standard Oil of California, later Chevron. Second, the automobile was emerging. In 1911, there were approximately 600,000 cars in America. By 1920, there would be 8 million. By 1930, 23 million. Gasoline demand was about to explode. The oil companies weren't being broken up at the end of the oil age. They were being freed at the beginning of the automotive age. Third, the breakup eliminated internal competition within Standard Oil. When it was one trust, the various Standard Oil companies competed internally for resources and management attention. As independent companies, each could pursue its own growth without internal constraints. Fourth, the breakup was actually inefficient from a regulatory perspective. The government thought it was creating competition. But most of the 34 companies operated in different geographic regions. Standard Oil of New Jersey dominated the Northeast. Standard Oil of California dominated the West Coast. Standard Oil of Indiana dominated the Midwest. They weren't really competing with each other. They were regional monopolies. The company's combined net worth rose fivefold and Rockefeller's personal wealth jumped to $900 million. Between 1910 and 1913, Rockefeller's fortune rose from $200 to $900 million. Let that sink in. The government action designed to limit his wealth tripled it in 2 years. By 1913, John D. Rockefeller was worth $900 million. Rockefeller, owning a 25% share in each of the new companies, was worth $900 million in 1913, $13 billion in today's dollars. This made him the richest man in the world. But even that number understates his wealth. In 1913, U.S. GDP was $39.1 billion. Rockefeller's fortune represented 2.3% of the entire American economy. Adjusted for economic share of GDP, his wealth would be equivalent to approximately $631 billion today. The government had tried to break him. They'd made him the richest human being who had ever lived. The companies. What happened to the 34 pieces? Standard Oil was split into 34 companies. Here's what happened to the major ones. Standard Oil of New Jersey became Esso. Then Exxon in 1972. Merged with Mobil in 1999 to form Exxon Mobil. Current market cap, over $400 billion. One of the largest companies in the world. Standard Oil of New York became Saucony. Then Mobil Oil in 1966. Merged with Exxon in 1999. The merger essentially reunited two of the largest pieces of Standard Oil 88 years after the breakup. Standard Oil of California became Chevron in 1984. Merged with Texaco in 2001. Current market cap, over $250 billion. Standard Oil of Indiana became Amoco in 1985. Acquired by BP in 1998. BP's market cap, over $100 billion. Standard Oil of Ohio, acquired by BP in 1987. Another piece reunited with the Indiana Company under British ownership. Continental Oil Company became Conoco. Merged with Phillips Petroleum in 2002 to form ConocoPhillips. Market cap, over $100 billion. The Ohio Oil Company became Marathon Oil. Still independent. Market cap, approximately $10 billion. Atlantic Refining Company, merged into ARCO. Later acquired by BP. Chesabrew Manufacturing, made petroleum jelly. Became Vaseline. Now owned by Unilever. The irony. Many of these companies later merged back together. ExxonMobil represents the reunion of Standard Oil of New Jersey and Standard Oil of New York. BP controls former Standard Oil of Ohio and Standard Oil of Indiana. The breakup was supposed to be permanent. A century later, much of Standard Oil has reassembled under different names. The 34 companies went in different directions. Some thrived. Some merged. Some were acquired. But collectively, they dominated the oil industry for the entire 20th century. Standard Oil's descendants were the Seven Sisters that controlled global oil until the 1970s. The breakup didn't end Standard Oil's dominance. It multiplied it. Why nobody saw this coming? The government expected the breakup to hurt Rockefeller, reduce his wealth, limit his power, make him an example of what happens to monopolists. Why were they so wrong? First, they misunderstood the timing. They thought they were breaking up Standard Oil at its peak. They were actually breaking it up at the beginning of its most profitable era. The automotive age was just starting. Gasoline, which had been a waste product refineries dumped in rivers, was about to become the most valuable commodity in the world. In 1911, kerosene was still Standard Oil's primary product. Kerosene for lamps. But electric lighting was replacing kerosene lamps. The government thought Standard Oil's best days were behind it. They were wrong. The automobile made gasoline more valuable than kerosene had ever been. And Standard Oil's 34 successor companies were perfectly positioned to supply it. Second, they misunderstood ownership. The government broke up the company. But they didn't break up the shareholding. Rockefeller still owned 25% of everything. The breakup didn't force him to sell. It just reorganized his portfolio. Before, he owned 25% of one company worth $600 million. After, he owned 25% of 34 companies collectively worth $3 billion. Third, they misunderstood the stock market. As a unified trust, Standard Oil was hard to value. Investors couldn't separate the profitable divisions from the less profitable ones. As 34 independent companies, each with clear financials, investors could accurately value each piece. The sum of the parts was worth more than the whole. Fourth, they misunderstood competition. The government thought creating 34 companies would create competition. But most of the companies operated in different regions. Standard Oil of New Jersey dominated the East Coast. Standard Oil of California dominated the West. They weren't really competing. The breakup created 34 regional monopolies instead of one national monopoly. From a consumer perspective, nothing changed. But from an investor perspective, each regional monopoly could be valued separately and traded separately. Fifth, they misunderstood Rockefeller. He wasn't an active manager anymore. He'd retired in 1897. He was a passive investor. The breakup didn't hurt him because he wasn't running daily operations. He just owned stock. And stock in 34 growing companies was worth more than stock in one restricted monopoly. The government made one fundamental mistake. They assumed that breaking up a company would reduce shareholder wealth. In this case, it multiplied it. 1911 to 1937, Rockefeller's final 26 years. May 15, 1911. Rockefeller was 72 years old. He would live another 26 years. Die on May 23, 1937, at age 97. Those 26 years were spent watching his wealth multiply and giving it away. Rockefeller had started philanthropic work in the 1890s. After he retired from Standard Oil's active management, he dedicated himself to charitable giving. He approached philanthropy with the same systematic efficiency he'd applied to business. 1901, Rockefeller Institute for Medical Research, now Rockefeller University, funded research that led to breakthroughs in medicine. 1902, General Education Board, funded schools, especially for Black Americans in the South, contributed to founding Spelman College, an historically black women's college. 1909, Rockefeller Sanitary Commission, worked to eliminate hookworm disease in the American South, successfully eradicated a disease that had infected millions. 1913, Rockefeller Foundation. Rockefeller spent much of the last 40 years of his life in retirement at Kykuit, his estate in Westchester County, New York, defining the structure of modern philanthropy. The foundation funded medical research worldwide, public health initiatives, education programs, scientific research, arts and humanities. Rockefeller University of Chicago, founded with Rockefeller's money in 1890, became one of America's premier research universities. The scale of his giving was unprecedented. By 1937, Rockefeller had given away over $550 million, equivalent to approximately $11 billion today. He gave away more than half his fortune during his lifetime. But even while giving away hundreds of millions, his wealth kept growing. The oil companies kept appreciating. Gasoline demand kept increasing. The stock values kept rising. By 1916, Rockefeller became America's first billionaire. His wealth continued to compound faster than he could give it away. At his death in 1937, his remaining fortune was estimated at $1.4 billion. The national GDP that year was $92 billion. He still controlled approximately 1.5% of America's economic output. At age 97, after giving away over half his fortune, his descendants continued his wealth and philanthropy. The Rockefeller family remained one of the richest and most influential families in America. Rockefeller Center in New York. Chase Manhattan Bank, now J.P. Morgan Chase. Countless foundations and institutions. The empire he built in oil transformed into an empire of finance, real estate, and philanthropy. The Standard Oil breakup had been the catalyst. The what-ifs. What if Standard Oil hadn't been broken up in 1911? The company would have remained a single entity. Rockefeller would still own 25% of it. But the market value would have been constrained by antitrust concerns. Investors would have continued to discount the stock because of regulatory risk. Rockefeller might have died worth $500 million instead of $1.4 billion. Still enormously wealthy. But not the richest human in history. What if the government had forced Rockefeller to divest his shares? This was discussed but never implemented. If Rockefeller had been required to sell his 25% stake, his wealth would have been limited to whatever price he could get in 1911. Approximately $300 million. He wouldn't have benefited from the subsequent appreciation. But this would have violated property rights. The government could break up the company. They couldn't force owners to sell their shares without compensation. Rockefeller had committed no crime. He just owned stock. What if the automobile hadn't been invented? This is the crucial what if. The Standard Oil breakup made Rockefeller rich because it came right before the automotive age. If the automobile had never been invented, kerosene demand would have declined as electric lighting spread. The oil companies would have struggled. The breakup might have actually hurt Rockefeller's wealth. Timing was everything. The breakup happened in 1911. Ford's Model T had been introduced in 1908. By 1913, Ford was producing cars on assembly lines. By 1920, millions of Americans owned cars, all needing gasoline. Rockefeller's wealth multiplied not because of the breakup per se, because the breakup freed 34 oil companies to exploit the automotive revolution independently. As separate companies, they could each pursue the gasoline market aggressively without internal Standard Oil coordination constraints. What if the Supreme Court had ruled differently? Justice John Marshall Harlan dissented on the rule of reason. Justice John Marshall Harlan concurred with the dissolution of Standard Oil, but he denounced the rule of reason as inconsistent with the clear words of the statute. Harlan thought the Sherman Act banned all monopolies, not just unreasonable ones. If Harlan's view had prevailed, the remedy might have been more severe. Perhaps forced divestiture. Perhaps criminal penalties. Perhaps a more aggressive breakup that prevented the companies from remaining regionally dominant. But the rule of reason prevailed. It made future antitrust enforcement more difficult. Companies could argue their monopolies were reasonable. This interpretation lasted for decades. It's still the standard today. The irony, the rule of reason was supposed to make antitrust law more flexible. It ended up protecting monopolies by requiring proof of unreasonable behavior. Breaking up Standard Oil became the exception, not the rule. The numbers tell the story. 1870. Standard Oil founded. Initial value, $1 million. Rockefeller's stake, $267,000, 26.67% ownership. 1882. Standard Oil Trust formed. Value, $70 million. Rockefeller's stake, approximately $18 million, 25.7% ownership. 1890. Standard Oil controls 88% of refined oil in America. Estimated value, $150 million. Rockefeller's fortune, $150 million. 1906. Federal government files antitrust suit. Standard Oil value, approximately $400 million. Rockefeller's stake, $100 million. Total fortune, $200 million. May 15, 1911. Supreme Court orders breakup. Standard Oil value, $600 million. Rockefeller's stake, $150 million. Total fortune, $300 million. 1913. 2 years after breakup. The 34 companies' combined value, approximately $3 billion. Rockefeller's stake, $750 million. Total fortune, $900 million. 1916. Rockefeller becomes America's first billionaire. Fortune, $1 billion plus. 1937. Rockefeller dies. Remaining fortune, $1.4 billion. He'd given away over $550 million to charity. Adjusted for economic share of GDP, Rockefeller's 1913 fortune of $900 million represented 2.3% of U.S. GDP. Today's equivalent, $631 billion, making him, arguably, the richest human who ever lived. The numbers don't lie. The breakup that was supposed to limit his wealth made him the richest person in history. May 15, 1911, 6 p.m., Kykuit Estate. Rockefeller finished dinner. Potatoes. Vegetables. He ate simply despite his wealth. His wife said he had died in 1915, but in 1911 she sat across from him. They'd been married 47 years. The telegram from that morning sat on his desk. The Supreme Court decision. The order to dissolve Standard Oil. The end of an empire. Rockefeller wasn't upset. He'd known this was coming for years. Since 1906 when the government filed suit. Since 1909 when Judge Sanborn ruled against him. The Supreme Court decision was inevitable. He'd prepared. Consulted with his financial advisors. Frederick Taylor Gates had run the numbers. Looked at what each of the 34 companies would be worth independently. Done the math. The conclusion, the breakup would make Rockefeller richer. His advisors had suggested selling shares. Getting out before the breakup. Converting stock to cash. Rockefeller refused. Although those close to him advised him to sell his shares, he refused to do so. Why? Because he understood something they didn't. The oil age was just beginning. The automotive age was just starting. Gasoline would replace kerosene as the primary petroleum product. And each of the 34 companies would benefit independently. Better to own 25% of 34 growing companies than 25% of one restricted company. He'd built the empire through efficiency and systematic thinking. He saw the breakup the same way. Not as destruction. As reorganization. The same assets. The same oil wells. The same refineries. Just different corporate structures. And different stock values. Rockefeller went to bed early that night. 9 p.m. His routine never varied. He'd wake at 6 a.m. Exercise. Pray. Read his Bible. Have breakfast. Play golf. The same schedule whether his empire was intact or being broken apart. He slept well. Why wouldn't he? The government thought they'd defeated him. They'd actually made him invincible. They were doomed from the start. The government's antitrust case against Standard Oil was doomed from the moment they decided to break up the company without forcing divestiture. They assumed breaking up the company would break Rockefeller's power. They didn't understand that power came from ownership, not corporate structure. They assumed the breakup would reduce monopoly. They didn't understand that they were creating 34 regional monopolies instead of one national monopoly. They assumed shareholders would be harmed. They didn't understand that the market would value 34 independent companies higher than one restricted trust. Every assumption was wrong. The government won the case. Got the remedy they asked for. Broke up the greatest monopoly in American history. And in doing so, they made John D. Rockefeller the richest human being who had ever lived. The irony is perfect. The thing designed to limit his power multiplied it. The breakup designed to reduce his wealth tripled it. The punishment designed to hurt him made him invincible. It is not surprising that the prayer of Wall Street today is, "Benevolent Providence, grant us a new dissolution of the trust," commented President Theodore Roosevelt, one of the most bitter opponents of trusts, ironically. Even Roosevelt saw it. The breakup had backfired completely. They were doomed from May 15, 1911. They just didn't know it yet. Because the same day they thought they destroyed Rockefeller's empire, they actually gave birth to Exxon Mobil, Chevron, BP's American operations, ConocoPhillips, Marathon, and a dozen other oil giants. The same day they thought they limited monopoly power, they actually created the modern oil industry. The same day they thought they won, they actually lost. And John D. Rockefeller, calm, calculating, systematic, understood this immediately. Standing on the golf course reading the telegram. Not upset. Not worried. Just calculating. The government had played checkers. Rockefeller had played chess. And he'd won. Not through the breakup. Through ownership. Through patience. Through understanding that the oil age was just beginning and that 34 companies would capture more value than one. May 15, 1911. The day Rockefeller lost his empire. And won everything.